you, thank you. It says Freedom Force International. Don't fight City Hall when you can be City Hall. Does that make sense? We're tired of standing on the outsides of the City Hall, looking in through the windows, looking at those sitting in a big fat chair, saying, oh, those of you in there who are in power, won't you please listen to us? Won't you look at our petitions? We signed a petition, we wrote you a letter. Won't you please follow the Constitution for us? And they laugh at us. It's time for us to get on the inside. And that's what Freedom Force is all about. That's what Red Pill University is all about. That's what Red Pill Expo is all about. That's what you are all about. Or you wouldn't be here. Spontaneously, the other night, I told you about my Crusader gene, and everybody liked it. I've heard that comment 100 times. Oh, yeah, I think I got the Crusader gene too. I think you do, or you wouldn't be here. So, okay, welcome, Crusaders. I'm going to give you a little talk tonight, not about Freedom Force, not about our struggle, not about what we have to do, should do, and must do, and didn't do, darn it. But I'm going to talk about conspiracy theory. Well, not really theory, as you'll see. That's a knee-jerk phrase, isn't it? You start to tell people about something. Oh, are you one of those conspiracy theorists? I have learned to say, yep. I'm one of them. Let me tell you why. So tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about why people call me that. I never really didn't want that handle until Wikipedia gave it to me. First thing you find when you go up on Wikipedia is that J. Griffin, well-known conspiracy theorist, ... So I said, okay, I guess that's my handle. But what is a conspiracy? Look it up in the dictionary. Easy. Conspiracy is when two or more people get together and they plot to do something that they plot in secret. They get together and then they do it in secret, and they plot to do something that is either illegal or immoral. That's the definition of a conspiracy. And I'm going to be talking about two or more people that have gotten together in secret, and they're doing something which is, there's the rub. Is it illegal? No. Most of what they do is entirely legal because they write the bloody laws. They see to it that the laws authorize everything they do. Not everything, because in spite of that, they still resort to a lot of illegal actions, but our problem is not with their illegal actions, it's with their legal actions. So it's not really a conspiracy on the basis of legality, but on the basis of ethics, morality, right and wrong. What they are doing, they believe, is entirely ethical. They believe they are the good guys. They are the ones, in their minds, who are saving the world from the idiots, like you and me. The idiots who think that they have a right to stand against the group. Those idiots that think they have individual rights, that no matter how big the number is, they still have those rights. They think that the purpose, those idiots think that the purpose of the state is to protect the individual against the passion of the mob. Isn't that awful? And so their mission is to get rid of all of those things that support the idiots, get rid of national boundaries, get rid of family units, get rid of all of the things that support individualism. And since they consider themselves to be collectivists, which means they believe that the group is more important than the individual, that the collective is the basis of society, anything that helps to bring about this new world order that they talk about so much, which is the world order of collectivism, world government based on the model of collectivism, which means that all-powerful government at the top, speaking for the people, but the people in reality serving the state, serving as slaves at the bottom. That's their idea of the New World Order. And they see it as they really honestly, I think many of them at least start out that way. They see it as the ideal system. There have been a lot of utopian books written about it. Movies have been written about it. It's taught in school. I learned it very well at the University of Michigan, that, you know, greater good of the greater number. The individual must be sacrificed if necessary for the greater good of the greater number. So it's taught, it's believed, it's the embodiment, it's the mindset of most people in the world today, including in the United States and Canada and most of the Western world. They may not recognize that they believe essentially the same thing as the Communist Party in China, but they do. If they could analyze underneath all of the labels, look beyond the flags, look beyond the facial features and the uniforms and the language, they look at the principles that people believe, the world has bought in to collectivism in one form or another. Collectivism is not my topic today, and the battle between collectivism and individualism, but it is the cornerstone of our struggle. It is whether we win, when I say we, whether individualism wins against collectivism or not will determine your future and the future of your children and your grandchildren. That's not my topic. Here I am talking about it because I just had to. That crusader gene kicked in there, and I had to get it out. So I'm talking about conspiracy. We're going back to that. These guys really are not conspirators in their mind because they think they're doing a good thing. And they believe that the end justifies the means. And most people in this room probably believe that also, even though we speak against it. Because there can't be an argument, you know. The end justifies the means. The truth is, not all ends are justified by all means, but some ends are justified by some means, and then we get into that argument. Here I go, digressing again, but it just came to mind. We're all against torture, right? But if some fiend had your child kidnapped, and they were going to kill your child, and you had hold of a companion of the kidnapper, and you knew that that companion knew where your child was, would you torture that bastard to get your child back? Ooh, what a decision, you see? You can always find some moral situation where all of a sudden things that you thought were black and white suddenly start looking kind of gray. So that's where the collectivists have such a good time, because they trick us with things like that. You know, they trick us that the national security, if we don't torture these people, look what will happen when they may bomb New York or kill millions of Americans. So it's justified. It's justified if the end is superior enough, then the mean can be adjusted to anything. So we're back to the conspiracy thing again. So these people are not conspirators in their minds because they really believe that this glorious New World Order is a good thing, and we are the people standing in its way. They are crusaders for justice, for peace, they think. And it just so happens that along the way they can make a lot of money and have power, so I'm sure that doesn't make any difference in their thinking. But it might. But in our minds, ladies and gentlemen, we who understand what they have planned for us to build their great utopian society, so-called, they know, we know, I should say, that we will be subjected to slavery. And in our minds, we do not have to buy their false arguments. We know what's coming, what they have in plan for us. And so we think it's terribly unethical, to say the least. And so in the minds of most people in the world, this is a conspiracy of the worst order, as far as we are concerned. So we dispense with the word. Now let's go back to the issue. My topic is the Quigley formula. How many know who Quigley is? Should be a lot in this group, yes. About 15% probably. The Quigley formula, and the subtitle really tells it all. The subtitle is The Conspiratorial View of History, as explained by the conspirators themselves. And so that's what I'm going to do tonight. I'm not going to give you any theory. I'm going to give you conspiracy fact, history, reality. So I'll start with this. Yeah, this is fun. It was show and tell day in the first grade. And the kids were told to bring in something that they could show the class and talk about. And so most of them brought in toys or a little book or something that they liked. But little Johnny brought in a kitten. Well, the kitten was alive, and it was cute. It was kittling around and meowing, and of course, all the children were attracted to the kitten. So after a while, Johnny turned up to the group. He says, you know, I wonder whether this kitten is a boy kitten or a girl kitten. And so the discussion went around the classroom. Did anybody know whether this kitten was boy or girl? Hadn't a clue. So the teachers was asked, when the kids said, teacher, is this kitten a boy kitten or a girl kitten? And so she asked the class if anybody in the class knew. There was silence that spread across the room. They didn't have a clue. Finally, Johnny said, I know. The teacher said, you do? How can you tell? How can you tell the difference? He said, my father says that we live in a democracy. And in a democracy, the majority always has the right answer, so we'll take a vote on it. And everybody thought it was a wonderful idea because it was an American school. And everybody knew that democracy, the majority rules, the majority is always right. All important decisions like this one are decided by a vote. And I'm here to discuss that assumption. This may be a blue pill. And I'm here to suggest that there is a red pill that will reveal that underneath that mirage of the democracy being a good thing, that maybe democracy is not so hot after all. And that maybe it is a mirage, maybe it is an illusion that is being offered to us to confuse us, to keep us from recognizing reality, and is being used to enslave us. Now that's my theme. Let's see how I can do on it in the time left. Okay, the Quigley formula. Who is this man Quigley? I say man because Carroll Quigley is his name, and if I just mentioned the name, you wouldn't know whether it was a boy or a girl by the name. But Carroll Quigley is a very well-known figure in modern political science because he was a professor at Georgetown University. He was a very highly esteemed professor of history. He just happened to be the professor that taught William Clinton when he was a student at Georgetown University, and they developed a friendship, actually. And although I can't prove this yet through documentation, you'll find out why in a minute. I believe that Quigley was the person who was responsible for Clinton getting the Rhodes Scholarship. Now, Quigley is important for a lot of reasons, not just because he's a professor at Georgetown and written some books and all that, but because he was known as the official, well, the unofficial, I suppose, historian of one of the greatest conspiracies of all history. He wrote and documented the details of the origin, the growth, the development, and the existing reality of the most successful secret society that was ever created. He knew about it, although he was not a member of it. He had been invited into its inner circles and given access to the conspiracy's private papers. They wanted him to write their history. And who better than a professor of history at Georgetown University? And in his own writings, Professor Quigley said, I had no aversion to this group at all. He admired what they were doing. He said, my only difference of opinion was that they wished to remain unknown. He thought that what they were doing was so important and so great that it really should be revealed to the world. And so instead of writing what was probably intended to be a private history book for this group, he wrote a book and had it published by Macmillan. Well, that was something else. It went out into the world. And idiots like me got hold of a copy of it. And we read it. Can you imagine a big, thick book I know I wrote one, but that's beside the point. This is even bigger than mine, 1,000 pages, small print, very boring reading, until you come to some passages where he says something that'll blow your mind. He said, did I reread that right? Then you go back and read it again, and I'll be reading some passages here in a moment, and say, by golly, he really did say that. Consequently, when the word got out, I suppose eventually to the inner circle of the secret society, they said, hey, we don't want this book out where anybody can read it. And so Macmillan pulled it off. They wouldn't reprint it again. They said there was no demand for it. But Quigley himself got kind of, got his knickers in a wrinkle over that. He said, they're not selling my book. And he found out that everybody had orders for the book, and they were saying there was no demand for it. Strange that Quigley wouldn't have figured out what was really going on. So anyway, that's what happened. So nevertheless, this is why the book is important and why Quigley is important, because when President Clinton received the nomination of the Democrat Party for president nomination, he gave honorable mention to Professor Quigley. And after he was elected to office, then in a couple of his speeches, he also gave honorable mention to this professor, kindly professor, is at Georgetown University. He said he had a great influence on influencing my own political ideas. Well, most people thought of that as, well, it's not nice. Here's a newly elected president paying gratitude and homage to this kindly old professor at Georgetown University. But the truth of the matter is that those who knew who Quigley was, and why he had written the book, how he got access to those papers, and what he was saying, the history of this secret society, this conspiracy, which we'll be describing in great length here in a moment, those people, just the few, the elect, the informed ones, the aware ones, the illuminated ones, if we may say, they knew that it was code. Clinton was telling those people, right in front of the faces of everybody else who didn't know anything, he was delivering a message. He was saying, look, I know about this conspiracy, and I am now in its service. And everybody who understood what Quigley had written got the message. That's how they work. They do things right out in the open, but they use phrases and concepts that the average person just doesn't understand. So that's why it's important. And so what this guy Quigley wrote was the conspiratorial view of history, explained by conspirators themselves. But as I said, he was actually very close to it, and was probably intended to be the official historian of this group. Now, Quigley described this conspiracy in 2 books. One was called Tragedy and Hope, and the other, The Anglo-American Establishment. And as I mentioned a moment ago, these were not for public consumption. I'm going to summarize in my own words what this was all about. And then I'm going to go back in the time remaining and give you actual quotations to prove that my summary is accurate. If I didn't do that, you'd probably not believe that I was summarizing it correctly. First of all, this secret society was formed by Cecil Rhodes. Now, Cecil Rhodes was the Prime Minister of the Cape Colony of South Africa between 1890 and 1896. Very powerful political figure. Because of his cunning and influence, he was able to literally capture control of almost all of the natural resources of South Africa, all the mining resources. Just you can imagine how wealthy this man was. Most historians and encyclopedias refer to him as one of the most wealthy men in the world because of that. But what they don't tell you is that when he died, he did not donate that money to his family. He created a series of wills and gave it all to a secret society. And he described it in great detail. We know about it today because the will was administered by a gentleman by the name of William Stead. He was the administrator, and he wrote the book called The Last Will and Testament of C.J. Rhodes. And so we had that book also to draw from. And Stead himself was a member of the secret society. Now, the Rhodes Scholarship, by the way, was only one of those, it was formed by only one of those 5 wills, and it was the lesser of the group. And as you look at the whole thing in mass, you realize that the Rhodes Scholarship was nothing more than a recruiting funnel for the secret society. It exists today, they say, and is a major historical force since World War I. Its goal originally was to expand the British Empire and culture to dominate the world. They felt that they were so enlightened and so fortunate to have the best culture in the world that it was their obligation to force it upon the rest of the world, because the masses were just too ignorant to understand what was best for them. And since they had the best culture in the world, it was their noblesse oblige to put it upon the rest of the world, whether they wanted it or not. But in particular, they didn't want to tell them that they were doing it. That was the major part. That's where the secrecy came in. Now, eventually, they dropped that goal because they realized that it was hard to enlist members of this society in other countries, which they needed to do, if the goal was to make the British Empire the center of it. And so they dropped it at some point very early on, and it evolved to the concept of world government based on the model of collectivism ruled behind the scenes. The method of doing this was to capture control of the power centers of society. The power centers are defined as those groups that have major influence over the thinking and the opinions of the population, and therefore determine the political policies of the nations. Those power centers, of course, are things like schools, labor unions, media centers, church organizations, any kind of a group. Political parties in particular were major targets of this. So the idea was that instead of invading a country with soldiers and guns and bayonets and bombs, they would simply infiltrate the power centers of society, and using vast quantities of money, they would capture control of the leadership of those organizations, and the members would follow like sheep, because people always follow their leaders like sheep. That's what they said, and that was their plan. Their structure was outwardly modeled after the Jesuit order, believe it or not, the Society of Jesus. Cecil Rhodes admired their structure. That is the organization, of course, from which Adam Weishaupt sprang. He was the founder of the Illuminati. And so Cecil Rhodes admired that structure, and he set out consciously to create that structure in his own organization. At the deeper level, this was a classical conspiracy. One of the things we found out from the writings of Adam Weishaupt, which are preserved right now in the British Museum, he described that the way to reach out and control the masses, his description of power centers was a little different than mine a moment ago. He called it rings within rings. He said, we have to have the center control of a few of us, they're the masterminds in the middle, and then we have a ring of influence around us. I believe he called that the Society of the Elect, his group. That would be about 12 or 20 people. And then around them would be a larger group or ring of influence. They call them the round tables. And they might exist in different geographical locations, and altogether that might be a couple of hundred, maybe 1,000. And beyond that, there's another ring, such as a political party, and so forth. They keep going out and out and out. And at each ring, he said, the members, the rank and file of the members, must not know that they are dominated and directed by a smaller group at the center, the smaller ring. And in this way, he said, we at the center, through our influence, can reach out and control the masses of the world. Cecil Rhodes thought that was a great idea, and he specifically specified that would be the structure for his secret society. So, what he created was an inner circle, which was the Society of the Elect. I mentioned that before. Originally, Rhodes was the brain trust for this, and he had in his, I should say, Rhodes had as his brain trust in that center, inner circle, people from the British banking and political world, the richest people that he could find. He, of course, was one of them. The center of gravity, as I mentioned a moment ago, shifted to the Rockefeller Group, eventually, with centers of influence in the Bilderberger groups and the Trilateral Commission. And as I said before, also the goal shifted away from the British Empire to the New World Order, based on the model of collectivism. Now, in Cecil Rhodes' group, the secondary rings that he created were called roundtables, and these existed then and now in the United States, in Britain, and all of the former British dependencies. They still exist. And the tertiary rings outside of that were called front groups. That was their name for them, front groups. And these existed and exist in each country. And all of the countries which were former British dependencies, they were called the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which you can now find in the telephone directory. And you'll find that this is headquartered in London, called the Chatham House. And this was named after William Pitt. Why William Pitt? Because he was the first Earl of Chatham. Okay, and of course in the United States, it exists, the headquarters, it exists in what is called the Pratt House. In the United States, it's called the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. And now that's an interesting story. They decided that it was okay to have the Royal Institute for International Affairs in all the former British dependencies because in those areas, the idea of royalty is very strong, it's very positive. Americans didn't like the idea of having royalty, so you couldn't get away with that. So they changed the name. Everything else is the same. In America, it's called the Council on Foreign Relations. This means it went to the Pratt House. Pratt was Harold Pratt, an American oil magnate and director of Standard Oil Company of New Jersey. Had a few bucks. After 100 years of penetration into the power centers, this Rhodesian network, as I call it. Let me pause right there. Why do I call it the Rhodesian network? Is because it doesn't have a name. One of their policies, one of their decisions made by Cecil Rhodes was not to have a name. His reason was if you don't have a name, no one can talk about you. Simple. Of course, why didn't I think of that? So they didn't have a name. Even Quigley doesn't know what to call them. He calls it the group sometimes. And he doesn't know what to call it. He calls it the intergroup or the association. I call it the Rhodesian group, or the Rhodesian network. So at least it has a name. So this Rhodesian network, now after 100 years of penetration into the power centers of the world, is close to its final achievement of its goal, at least in the Western world. Now I said the Western world is not our topic today, but we must be aware that there is a similar movement based upon exactly the same principles, collectivism, all of the tactics, the ideals, the ideological foundation is exactly the same, and it's in countries aligned with Moscow, Peking, and other regions led by Leninists. The only difference between the Leninists and the Rhodesians is that they're in competition with each other. They believe exactly the same thing. This is the basis of the left versus the right, except on an international scale and its most inner core at the secret society level. The same idea that they struggle for control and domination. Now that's my summary. Now, in the time remaining, which is getting very close, you gotta be kidding. Well, it's 0. I'm gonna give you just a sampling. I'm gonna pull rank a little bit here. me too much rank or I will become rank. I'll give you just a little sampling to let you know that I'm not just making this up.